Have you ever wondered why, with all the technology at our disposal, remote control tanks don't come much bigger than this?
But what would happen if we scaled it up a bit?
35 years ago, a group of defence engineers were given the mission of finding out, and they successfully fielded a fully sized, crewless remote control tank.
And it's probably the most successful thing I've ever been involved with.
But the project was scrapped, and this just might have been one of the biggest missed opportunities in the history of tank development.
This is the story of Project Crazy Horse.
Why that was never taken up, I don't know. Wonderful piece of work.
Being shot at is as unpleasant as it is dangerous, even if the people doing the shooting aren't intentionally trying to kill you.
Target practice is a vital component of military training, and it needs to be as realistic as possible. So you need a moving target. This is the Centurion target tank. And it's a tank designed with the sole purpose of being shot at.
It's just a regular Centurion, with a few bits of additional armour, and the main armament replaced with a dummy. It still needs a human driver, and whilst they earned danger pay on top of the standard wage, it wasn't a job for the faint-hearted. These red areas were the parts that those doing the target practice were explicitly told not to aim at, as they were weak or areas of importance, such as the vision ports or the towing eyes.
However, in typical squaddy fashion, this didn't stop soldiers from shooting at the things. It might bring an early end to the exercise. An ex-para, it would be a para, wouldn't it, who'd been on the range with the combat anti-tank weapon, wrote,
"We were told religiously not to fire at the red painted vision slots. Being highly disciplined parachute regiment soldiers, we totally ignored that and our sole aim was to aim for the vision blocks. Twice, check firing was announced as we hit the vision block, smashing it, and the poor old driver himself, and the vehicle quickly ground to a halt. No more firing that day until a repair was completed. Therefore, early finish and off to a German bar."
Due to increasing concerns for the health and safety of the driver, it was deemed that the risk of injury was far too great, even from inert warheads, and as a result, this Centurion was last shot at in 1986.
At the same time, the development of brand new anti-armour weapons, in particular MLRS Phase 3 and the TRIGAT missile system, called for a mobile target so that they could be properly tested.
So, in 1987, the Ministry of Defence approached the Royal Armament Research and Development Establishment, also known as RARDE, to develop a vehicle that was fully remote controlled for this purpose. They accepted the challenge, and so began Project Crazy Horse.
The team weren't loaded with money or resources to undertake their mission. The budget for the project was set at around £300,000, about £850,000 or just under $1 million at today's prices.
This was deemed enough for the construction of a single prototype, but there were plans to build more if it proved to be a success.
However, the $300,000 had to include the wages of the project team, so the expendable cash for the project was actually closer to £60,000. Compare that to the approximate £5.3 million it currently costs to convert a Challenger 2 to a 3, and you'll understand that this was an exceptionally tight budget in military terms. The vehicle that would become the prototype had to be selected from a stockyard of worn-out, rusty old tanks. A Mark I Chieftain that had previously been used for training, serial number 00EB33, was eventually selected and hauled away.
All they had to do now was figure out how to turn it into a giant remote-controlled target tank before the demonstration deadline of January 1989.
They quickly discovered that a modification of this sort would require a range of new parts that weren't available in military stores. As a result, several companies were drafted in to provide the specialist equipment needed. This would include everything from electro-hydraulics and telescoping masts to controllers and other parts used by remote control model planes.
With a plan in place, they got to work.
This wasn't the first time a remote control tank had been attempted, and their research took inspiration from earlier projects.
As early as the mid-1930s, the idea of a radio-controlled tank had been floating around, And there'd been a project to convert a light tank, although this was shelved until World War II broke out.
The project was revived, with a plan to convert up to 70 Matilda IIs. But it was promptly cancelled, as the cost and effort was probably not going to be worth the small reduction in casualties they might have offered.
The Soviets had equipped 2 battalions with radio-controlled tanks by the time that Germany invaded.
Called the Tele-tank, these were designed for use against fixed positions, using flamethrowers and even chemical weapons. They'd work in pairs, with a T-26 controlled by another tank up to 1,500 metres away. But they would never be used in this way. One battalion was destroyed by enemy bombing, and the other was converted back to regular T-26s to assist in the defence of Moscow. Perhaps the most famous remote-controlled vehicle of the war, while not a tank, was the German Goliath. This small tracked vehicle could carry 60 kilograms of explosives and was controlled at the end of a 650-metre cable. Just over 12,500 were made. Their slow speed, just 3.7 miles an hour, and thin armour made them vulnerable, and very few reached their targets. But when they did, the results could be very impressive. In 1965, the British Army Operational Research Establishment successfully adapted a Stuart Mark VI to be fully remote controlled at ranges of up to 2,500 yards and a speed of 30 miles an hour.
Adapted to be used in trials for the Wombat anti-tank weapon, the budget was extremely tight. For the conversion of 7 tanks, all in all, it cost £2,000, a rather unbelievable £50 with parts for each vehicle. And it worked, providing a realistic target that fulfilled the requirements of the trial. Amazingly, this success was never built on, because the team who developed it were only responsible for testing Wombat before moving on to something else. It was not their responsibility to champion or pursue the technology.
In 1969, the Weapons and Equipment Policy Committee had trialled making Chieftain tanks remotely controlled to allow them to wade through deep rivers without the crew inside. They'd developed a sophisticated but expensive electrical system linked to the hydraulics of the tank. It worked, but was abandoned, probably because of how much it cost, although we're not sure of the exact reason.
The technical success of these early projects, despite the fact they weren't used beyond the trial stage, makes it possible to imagine the team were quietly confident that their new project would also be a success.
In the workshop, the selected Chieftain was stripped of everything that was deemed unnecessary. Pretty much all of the internals of the fighting compartment were removed to make way for the new kit that would be needed inside. The main gun was removed and the turret was plugged with 2 slabs of metal welded together. Next, the engine was removed and checked over before being put back in, with the manual gearbox replaced by a more recent automatic gearbox. Then came the tricky job of lining up and mounting all the hydraulics inside the fighting compartment. A total of 4 hydraulic rams were installed into the tank, each attached to the controls of the vehicle. Essentially, the rams become the driver's arms and legs, allowing for accurate control of direction and speed just by changing how much the ram extends or retracts by. The driver's eyes are replaced by a camera, mounted just above the driver's hatch and encased in an armoured box. A live feed is then transmitted back to the vehicle controller.
At some point during the build, the engineers realised a potentially fatal flaw with the design. What if the tank controller lost signal? Now, if the controller was nearby, this wouldn't be an issue, but what if it was thousands of metres away?
If that tank went and we lost it, there was nothing going to stop it. If it went into Amesbury, it would come out the other side. So we came up with a clever idea, didn't we? We put a little tiny fuel tank in it.
Which limited its range. It's so obvious.
And you thought it was genius. So if it went, it could not go any further than that.
But you also had the kill switch.
There's an IR safety switch.
That someone could drive up in a Land Rover or vehicle next to it and just aim the infrared remote control and go click like a television and switch it off.
It was also at this time that the name of the project was conceived.
We said, look, this is a Chieftain.
If this runs away, it's going to be a crazy.
It was perfect.
In April 1988, at Larkhill Ranges, it was time to give the tank some initial tests to confirm that it could indeed be controlled remotely using the equipment the team had built. And it could.
control interface needed to be mounted on a mobile platform. Therefore, a support vehicle was needed. And despite some opposition from the higher-ups, the team managed to acquire this, a prototype Stormer CVRT.
From the distance comes the Stormer, shown here in its basic configuration of an APC capable of carrying a full section of 12 men.
The Alvis Stormer, which is a slightly lengthened version of the Spartan armoured personnel carrier, both part of the CVRT range, Combat Vehicle Reconnaissance Tract. What they've done here is to strip out everything that's not necessary. So the original bench seats have gone, the NBC kit that would have been in the corner, to make room for the console, actually controlling Crazy Horse, and then you've got 3 seats bolted down the floor. They're actually straight out of an Austin Montego car.
The Montego 1.6L. It's capable of accelerating from 0 to 60 more than 2 seconds faster than the Ford Sierra 1.6L.
So this is the console. I'm sitting in the commander's seat, and in front of me you've got the controls for the remote control of Crazy Horse. You have got steering levers. There is the gear stick, emergency stop, pedals down by my feet, and then in front of me there is a screen which is linked to the camera on the tank itself, so you can see where it's going.
The mast and antenna were attached to the exterior of the hull, electronics and radio equipment installed, and with that, the Stormer was ready to go.
The team also took the time to iron out some of the issues that had arisen in the first trial.
The drivers complained that the field of view of the camera made it very difficult to gauge what kind of terrain they were going over and in what direction they were going. As a result, these 2 guide spikes were added, which solved the issue entirely.
Drivers also complained that they couldn't hear how the engine sounded, so didn't know what gear they were in or if the engine was struggling. A microphone in the tank and speakers in the Stormer fixed this issue as well. Even with the problems created by the Chieftain's notoriously unreliable engine and gearbox, the team would troubleshoot, fix and put the tank back into action again.
When a second round of trials were conducted at Shoeburyness in Essex, it was clear that the project was going incredibly well, almost too well. The project manager described his experience.
It worked to the point it was boring, I remember by the end, because what can I see? I can see a tank driving towards me and then turning around and going away. Well, that's what you're meant to see, because that's the silhouette, everything is just right. The fact it's being driven from 3 miles away is the clever bit.
Everyone was delighted with the progress the project was making, and it was gearing up to be a resounding success. But there were a couple of problems.
The money was running out, and the world was changing.
But before we carry on, we'd just like to say thank you for watching this far, and if you do like this video, please do consider giving us a like. Not only does it support us, but it also feeds the YouTube algorithm, and it will share it with other people who might find it interesting.
In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. This signalled the beginning of the end of the Cold War, and with it a huge reduction and reorganisation of defence spending. RARDE began its transition into the Defence Research Establishment, with a smaller budget and a strict mandate to focus on projects that had an immediate military application.
It is the increasing responsibility of the establishment to carry out investigations into future requirements.
Blue Sky's research projects, like Crazy Horse, were to be cut. The only way that Project Crazy Horse could survive would be to find a sponsor in the Ministry of Defence.
To save the project, the team switched their efforts from engineering to PR, to get the project on the desks and in front of the eyes of MOD decision makers.
The team went as far as creating Crazy Horse branded merch, including beer mats, mugs and even t-shirts.
Crazy Horse would also feature in the British TV show Combat 89, in which different regiments would compete against each other in various military exercises. One of these exercises, called Close Quarter Battle, required the contestants to fire a Carl Gustav at an enemy tank. Crazy Horse was used as the target, finally achieving its intended purpose before a national TV audience. But things didn't go as planned. Just before the tank was due to take part, the radio signal stopped working entirely. With no time to try and fix the issue, the team were forced to drive the tank conventionally.
It was a disheartening blow to the team and a PR disaster, demonstrating to critics just how unreliable this technology could be. During another important trial, the tank signal was lost again, and attempts to activate the kill switch failed completely.
I recall it met with little success, and at one prestigious demonstration it ran away and gently crashed into terrain, a gully I think, that probably killed the project.
This showed that Crazy Horse wasn't just unreliable, but potentially dangerous too.
There was another setback when the UK withdrew from the TRIGAT missile programme, which was the very weapon system that the project had been instigated to test.
But the final blow was to come from a competing project, one which, in MOD's eyes, had a more useful and wider application.
The Mobile Advanced Robotics Defence Initiative Technology Demonstrator, RARDE for short, was effectively a sensor suite and weapons system mounted at the rear of an Alvis Streaker. As a result, it was RARDE that got the funding. Project Crazy Horse didn't, and the personnel were reassigned. There were glimmers of resurrection when Crazy Horse was used to test upgrades to Swingfire and Brimstone missiles, but this didn't come to anything.
The 1991 Iraq War brought about the best opportunity of a revival.
And now the big guns have fired for the first time in anger in the Gulf Theatre.
The project lead recalls a conversation he had with the MOD on the phone.
I was in my job and had a very interesting couple of phone calls with the MOD, highly classified at the time, which said, you've got this tank, so I've moved on from this Crazy Horse tank. Tell us a bit more about it. Could it have mine clouds put on it? Would it be quite effective? I said, yeah, it would be certainly a path clearance for armoured vehicles. And would it work in sound? Yeah. And you must remember this is 1990. I said, because it looks like we've got a forthcoming requirement for a lot of path clearing in early 1991. How many tanks have you got? So I've got one. Sorry. And they didn't pursue it because there was a chance at one stage in 1990 that Crazy Horse could have been the first tank across the start line for the first Iraq War.
Crazy Horse was successfully tested with the mine plough, but due to operational urgency, it was decided that there wouldn't be enough time to convert the quantity required for Operation Granby. Crazy Horse was last trialled in 1994, before being abandoned and forgotten about. Fortunately, it was noticed in 1995 and saved from scrapping when it was sent to the Tank Museum along with the Stormer command vehicle.
And today, here in the Vehicle Conservation Centre, you can see what is quite possibly the biggest remote control tank in the world.
Project Crazy Horse showed what could be achieved with a tiny budget but a large amount of creativity. And it demonstrated there was a potential future for unmanned ground vehicles on the battlefield.
It wasn't faultless, but no doubt with more time and money, they could have ironed out the bugs. After all, this was a nimble and enthusiastic team, the peak of its expertise, with bags more potential.
And that's why this project might just be one of the biggest missed opportunities in the history of tank development.
I have to say that from scratch, we built that. And it's probably the most successful thing I've ever been involved with, because you could drive that better than a driver could. It was so precise, it was untrue, and why that was never taken up, I don't know.
Today, we're constantly told that remote operation is the future of the battlefield, but 35 years ago, we got tantalisingly close.
And that leads us to wonder, what might have happened if the project was funded and had been allowed to evolve?
Might we have seen a main armament with autoloader fitted in the turret? Might the main battle tanks of today been completely unmanned?
It just goes to show that some of the worst decisions in history have been made by the people who own the spreadsheets, which leads us to wonder what might have been.
What do you think? Leave us your answers in the comments below.
We'd like to thank our Patreon supporters and YouTube members for their ongoing support. If you'd like to join them and receive benefits such as early access to videos, behind the scenes at the museum, and an exclusive monthly Q&A with Chris Copson, check the links in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, you'd probably also enjoy this one, and this one.